She was called Hitler's lucky ship. For 3 years, Scharnhorst seemed invincible. She sank an armed merchant cruiser with a single salvo. She sank the carrier HMS Glorious and 2 destroyers in one afternoon. She survived 9 British torpedoes, countless bombs, and a pursuit by the entire home fleet. She slipped through the English Channel in broad daylight under the noses of the Royal Navy. German propaganda loved her. The crew believed they were charmed. And then, on December 26, 1943, in the freezing darkness of the Arctic, her luck ran out. This is the story of Scharnhorst, a ship that accumulated victories and narrow escapes in equal measure, that represented German naval ambition and eventual futility, that survived everything until she didn't. The rise was spectacular. The fall was inevitable. Her career encapsulated the entire arc of Germany's surface fleet in World War II, early success mounting desperation, final destruction. Scharnhorst was commissioned on January 7, 1939, 8 months before the war began. She and her sister ship, Gneisenau, represented a new German naval philosophy: fast battleships that could outrun anything they couldn't outfight, and outfight anything they couldn't outrun. Scharnhorst was designed under treaty restrictions, nominally 26,000 tons, but actually closer to 32,000 fully loaded. 9 11-inch guns in 3 triple turrets. Speed of 32 knots, faster than most battleships, as fast as some cruisers. Heavy armour. She was a battle cruiser by British standards, though Germany classified her as a battleship. The distinction mattered less than the capability. Scharnhorst was powerful and fast, designed for commerce raiding in the Atlantic, where she could avoid stronger enemy units and destroy merchant convoys. Her first major operation came in November 1939, just months into the war. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were sent to patrol between Iceland and the Faroe Islands, looking for British armed merchant cruisers that were enforcing the blockade. On November 23rd, they found HMS Rawalpindi, an armed merchant cruiser, basically a converted passenger liner with guns. Rawalpindi was hopelessly outmatched. The captain knew it immediately. He sent a signal, enemy battlecruiser sighted. Then he turned to engage rather than surrender. Scharnhorst's first salvo hit Rawalpindi dead center. The ship exploded and sank in minutes. Only 38 of the 312 crew survived. It was a massacre, not a battle. Scharnhorst had drawn first blood, and German propaganda celebrated it as a great victory. The British saw it as murder. Both were right. The early raids established Scharnhorst's reputation. In February 1940, she and Gneisenau sortied into the Atlantic. They hunted merchant shipping. They sank several ships. They disrupted British convoy routes. But the real action came in April, during the invasion of Norway. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau provided cover for the invasion fleet. On April the 9th, they engaged the British battlecruiser HMS Renown in terrible weather off Norway. The battle was inconclusive: heavy seas, poor visibility, both sides firing, but scoring few hits. Scharnhorst took several hits from Renown's 15-inch guns, but wasn't seriously damaged. She withdrew. First contact with a capital ship, and she'd survived. The luck was holding. June 8, 1940. This was Scharnhorst's finest moment and most controversial action. She and Gneisenau were operating off Norway when they encountered the British carrier HMS Glorious and 2 destroyers. Glorious had been evacuating RAF aircraft from Norway. She should have had scouts in the air. She didn't. Scharnhorst spotted Glorious at extreme range over 26,000 yards. The German ships opened fire. The range was so great that Glorious probably thought she was safe. Battleships rarely hit targets at that distance. Scharnhorst's third salvo hit Glorious's flight deck. The carrier couldn't launch aircraft. She was defenseless. What followed was systematic destruction. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau closed range and pounded Glorious. The carrier was hit repeatedly. Fires broke out. She began listing. The 2 escorting destroyers, Acasta and Ardent, attacked with torpedoes, trying to save the carrier. They knew they'd die. They attacked anyway. Ardent was sunk by gunfire. Acasta launched torpedoes at Scharnhorst. One hit. The torpedo struck aft, causing significant damage and flooding. Scharnhorst's speed dropped. She had to withdraw for repairs. But Glorious was doomed. The carrier sank. Acasta was destroyed. Out of over 1,500 men on the 3 British ships, only 45 survived. Most died in the freezing water waiting for rescue that came too late. The sinking of Glorious was controversial. Scharnhorst had sunk a carrier, a significant achievement. But the circumstances were debated. Glorious wasn't ready for action. She wasn't properly defended. Some argued this wasn't a fair fight. Others pointed out that war isn't fair. Scharnhorst had found an opportunity and exploited it. The strategic result was clear: a British carrier destroyed. But Scharnhorst had paid a price. The torpedo from Acasta caused damage that required repairs lasting months. The destroyer's dying strike had bought time with their lives. Through late 1940 and into 1941, Scharnhorst underwent repairs and modifications. The torpedo damage was fixed. Anti-aircraft armament was improved. The ship was prepared for more Atlantic raiding. In January 1941, Operation Berlin began. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau broke out into the Atlantic to attack British convoys. This raid lasted 2 months. The ships ranged across the Atlantic hunting shipping. They sank or captured 22 merchant ships over 115,000 tons. They disrupted convoy schedules. They tied down British forces searching for them. It was a successful commerce raiding operation, exactly what Scharnhorst was designed for. But the raid also revealed limitations. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau encountered several convoys that were escorted by British battleships. German standing orders were clear: avoid combat with capital ships. Commerce raiders shouldn't risk themselves in fair fights, so Scharnhorst would detect a battleship escort and break off. Opportunities were missed. The ships were powerful, but doctrine restricted their use. They could sink merchants, but had to run from warships. This was sensible. Losing Scharnhorst in a gun battle would gain nothing but frustrating for crews who believed they could win. March 1941. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau reached Brest on the French Atlantic coast. They needed repairs and replenishment after 2 months at sea. Brest would become Scharnhorst's home port and prison. The ships were immediately targeted by RAF Bomber Command. Brest was within range of British bombers. The RAF attacked constantly. Scharnhorst was hit multiple times by bombs during raids. Some hits caused significant damage. The ship was repeatedly under repair. German fighters and anti-aircraft guns defended the port, but the bombing continued for months. Scharnhorst couldn't sortie because she was under repair. She couldn't be repaired quickly because of continued bombing. The situation was unsustainable. February 1942. Operation Cerberus, the Channel Dash. Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen would break out of Brest and return to Germany via the English Channel. This seemed insane. The channel was narrow, heavily defended within easy reach of British air and naval forces. No major German ships had attempted this, but staying in Brest was becoming impossible. Hitler ordered the dash. The ships left Brest at night and raced up the channel at full speed. The British were caught completely off guard. They knew the ships were in Brest. They had reconnaissance watching for a breakout. But fog and coordination failures meant the German ships were well into the channel before the British realized what was happening. Attacks were launched: torpedo bombers, destroyers, everything available. But they were hasty and uncoordinated. Scharnhorst was hit by a mine, but kept going. British torpedoes missed. The German ships, escorted by fighters and destroyers, blasted their way through. By evening, they were through the channel and approaching German waters. It was a humiliating failure for the Royal Navy and a propaganda victory for Germany. But the victory was hollow. Scharnhorst had escaped Brest, but both she and Gneisenau hit mines during the dash and needed repairs. Scharnhorst spent months in dry dock. When repairs were complete, she was sent to Norway. Hitler was obsessed with defending Norway. He believed the British would invade. He wanted his heavy ships there to counter any invasion fleet. So Scharnhorst went north to bases in Norway, where she'd remain for most of her final year. Norway was a death sentence disguised as safety. The ships were away from bombing raids, but they were also cut off from useful employment. Scharnhorst sat in Norwegian fjords doing nothing while the war was decided elsewhere. Occasionally, she'd sortie against Arctic convoys bringing supplies to the Soviet Union. These operations achieved little. The convoys were heavily defended. German standing orders still prohibited unnecessary risks. Scharnhorst would detect the escorts, decide the odds weren't favourable, and return to base. The crew's morale suffered. They were on a powerful ship doing nothing important. September 1943, Operation Sicilian. Scharnhorst and 10 destroyers sortied against a convoy. The operation was poorly planned and executed. The destroyers ran into terrible weather and turned back. Scharnhorst continued alone, found nothing, and returned to base. It was typical of this period sorties that accomplished nothing, risks taken for no gain. Admiral Dönitz, commanding the German Navy, was losing faith in surface ships. Submarines were the priority. The battleships and cruisers were expensive, vulnerable, and ineffective. But Hitler wouldn't allow them to be decommissioned. So they sat in Norway waiting. December 1943. German intelligence learned of another Arctic convoy, JW-55B. This convoy was carrying war supplies to the Soviet Union. Scharnhorst was ordered to attack it. This would be her final operation. The sortie was approved at the highest levels. Hitler wanted results. Dönitz was skeptical but ordered the attack. Admiral Bay, commanding from Scharnhorst, had serious doubts. The weather was terrible. The convoy would be defended. The British would have forces in the area, but orders were orders. On Christmas Day, Scharnhorst sailed from Norway with 5 destroyers. The British knew she was coming. British intelligence had been reading German naval codes for years. They knew Scharnhorst would sortie, and roughly when. Admiral Fraser, commanding the British Home Fleet, positioned forces to intercept. The battleship Duke of York, the cruiser Jamaica, and multiple destroyers were at sea. Other cruisers, Belfast, Sheffield, Norfolk, were shadowing the convoy and watching for Scharnhorst. The trap was set. December 26th, early morning. Scharnhorst approached the convoy from the north. The weather was appalling: gale-force winds, snow darkness. Visibility was almost zero. The German destroyers couldn't keep formation in the heavy seas. Bay sent them back to base. Scharnhorst continued alone. Around 9:00 a.m., she was detected by radar on the cruiser Belfast. The cruisers closed to engage. They opened fire. Scharnhorst was hit by Norfolk's 8-inch guns. Her forward radar was destroyed. Bay decided to break off and return to base. The attack on the convoy was abandoned, but Scharnhorst couldn't escape. The British cruisers shadowed her with radar. They reported her position continuously. Duke of York was closing from the south, cutting off Scharnhorst's route back to Norway. Admiral Fraser held his fire closing range, waiting for the perfect moment. At 4:50 p.m., Duke of York opened fire at just under 12,000 yards. Scharnhorst detected the battleship only minutes before. She tried to run. Her speed, normally 32 knots, should have let her escape. Duke of York could only make 28 knots. But Scharnhorst had been at sea in terrible weather. Her engines were stressed. Her hull was fouled. She couldn't reach top speed. The battle was one-sided. Duke of York's 14-inch guns pounded Scharnhorst, shell after shell hit. Scharnhorst's armour was designed to resist 11-inch shells from her own guns, not the 14-inch shells from Duke of York. The hits caused devastating damage. One shell hit Scharnhorst's boiler room. Her speed dropped to 8 knots. She was crippled. The British closed in. Destroyers launched torpedoes. Cruisers fired continuously. Scharnhorst was surrounded, burning, being torn apart by shells and torpedoes. Her guns kept firing. Some turrets were still operational, the crew still fighting. But the outcome was inevitable. Around 7:30 p.m., Scharnhorst capsized and sank. Out of a crew of nearly 2,000 men, only 36 survived. The rest went down with the ship or died in the freezing Arctic water. The survivors were pulled from the sea by British ships. Most were suffering from hypothermia. They were the lucky ones. Admiral Bay wasn't among the survivors. He went down with his ship, as did the captain, and nearly all the crew. The British losses were minimal. Duke of York took no damage. The cruisers and destroyers were all intact. A few men were wounded. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Scharnhorst had been caught crippled and systematically destroyed. The luck that had carried her through 3 years finally ran out. The invincible ship died in the Arctic darkness. Scharnhorst's loss effectively ended the German surface fleet as a fighting force. Tirpitz remained in Norway, but never sortied successfully again. The cruisers were ineffective. The destroyers were too few. Germany's last hope for surface naval power sank with Scharnhorst. The strategic impact was minimal. The war would continue for another 16 months. But the symbolic impact was enormous. Germany's most successful surface raider was gone. The ship that propaganda had built into a legend was at the bottom of the Barents Sea. The reasons for Scharnhorst's final sortie are still debated. The operation made limited strategic sense. Even if Scharnhorst had reached the convoy and sunk several merchants, it wouldn't have changed the war. The British had overwhelming numerical superiority in Arctic waters. Scharnhorst was outnumbered and outpositioned from the start. German intelligence didn't know Duke of York was in the area, a catastrophic failure. But even knowing wouldn't have changed the fundamental problem. Scharnhorst was ordered to attack a defended convoy in waters where the enemy had superior forces. The decision to send Scharnhorst out represents the desperation of Germany's strategic position by late 1943. Surface ships were becoming liabilities. They consumed resources, required escorts and support, and accomplished little. But Hitler wouldn't decommission them, so they sat in ports or made suicidal sorties. Scharnhorst's final operation was undertaken partly because doing nothing wasn't acceptable politically, even though doing something in this case meant death. The crew of Scharnhorst deserves recognition. They fought their ship to the end. Even when crippled, even when surrounded, they kept firing. The survivors spoke of discipline and courage under impossible circumstances. These were professional sailors fighting a lost battle because that's what duty required. They weren't fighting for conquest anymore. By late 1943, anyone paying attention knew Germany was losing. They were fighting because they were at sea under attack, and surrender wasn't an option they considered. The tactical execution by the British was professional. Admiral Fraser positioned his forces perfectly. He used radar to track Scharnhorst in conditions where visual contact was impossible. He cut off her escape route. He closed range before firing, maximizing hit probability. He coordinated his cruisers and destroyers for the final attack. This was modern naval warfare radar-radio coordination, overwhelming force, applied with precision. Scharnhorst never had a chance once Fraser had her location. The contrast between Scharnhorst's early career and her end is stark. In 1940s to 41, she seemed unstoppable. She sank Rawalpindi Glorious and numerous merchants. She survived torpedo hits, bomb hits, mine hits. She raided successfully in the Atlantic. She dashed through the English Channel. The legend of Hitler's lucky ship was built on real achievements. But by 1943, the context had changed. British radar was better. British intelligence was reading German codes. British forces were more numerous and better coordinated. The luck hadn't changed, the environment had. Scharnhorst was the same ship, but the war had evolved beyond her. There's a poignancy to Scharnhorst's story. She was a beautiful ship, well designed, well built, with a crew that believed in her. She had genuine success in the early war years, but she was built for a strategic concept, commerce raiding, disrupting British supply lines that never quite worked. German surface raiders could sink merchants, but they couldn't blockade Britain. They could disrupt, but not decisively. The resources spent building and maintaining Scharnhorst might have been better used building submarines. By 1943, that was obvious. But in 1936, when Scharnhorst was laid down, German naval planners still believed in the battleship. The propaganda value of Scharnhorst's career was always more important than her strategic value. Every sinking, every successful raid, every narrow escape was publicized by German media. The crew were heroes. The ship was a symbol of German naval prowess. This mattered for morale. for international perception, for Hitler's ego. But propaganda victories don't win wars. Scharnhorst's real contribution was modest. She disrupted some convoys, sunk some ships, tied down British forces hunting for her. Useful, but not decisive. The propaganda built her into something more than she was. The wreck of Scharnhorst lies in about 290 meters of water in the Barents Sea. The exact location was confirmed in 2000 by Norwegian researchers. The wreck is a war grave. Nearly 2,000 men died there. Diving on the wreck is controversial. Some argue it should be left undisturbed as a memorial. Others believe documenting the wreck serves historical purposes. The German and Norwegian governments have worked to protect the site. Scharnhorst lies where she died in the cold Arctic dark, a monument to a ship that fought hard but couldn't win. The legacy of Scharnhorst is complex. She was the most successful German surface raider of World War II. She had genuine achievements. She survived longer and accomplished more than most German capital ships. But most successful is relative. She didn't change the war's outcome. She didn't achieve strategic objectives. She was effective within the narrow constraints of commerce raiding, but ultimately irrelevant to the war's result. Germany needed to defeat Britain's navy or cut her supply lines completely. Scharnhorst did neither. She was a tactical success in a strategic failure. For naval historians, Scharnhorst represents the last gasp of the battleship era. She was fast, powerful, well-armed, everything a battleship should be. But she operated in a war increasingly dominated by aircraft carriers and submarines. Surface ships were vulnerable without air cover. Radar negated the advantages of speed and stealth. The entire concept of the capital ship was becoming obsolete. Scharnhorst's fate illustrated that. She was a magnificent ship rendered obsolete by technology and strategy. Hitler's lucky ship ran out of luck on December 26, 1943. 3 years of victories, narrow escapes, and legendary reputation ended in the Arctic darkness. 36 men survived out of nearly 2,000. The ship that seemed invincible proved very vincible when faced with superior force and better tactics. The rise was spectacular. Rawalpindi, glorious Atlantic raids, Channel Dash. The fall was inevitable. Trapped in Norway, ordered on a suicide mission, caught and destroyed by an enemy that had her tracked on radar from the moment she left port. Scharnhorst's story is Germany's naval war in miniature. Early success built on surprise and aggression, followed by grinding attrition, then final destruction. The luck held until it didn't. And when it didn't, it ended completely.